Welcome to the debate. We are diving into a fascinating cultural and technological paradox today. The conscious rejection of the powerful, pocket-sized supercomputer, the modern smartphone, by the very people who should be its biggest fans, particularly Gen Z and those deeply connected in tech circles. We're witnessing a real embrace of minimalist devices, the so-called dumb phones, like the Light Phone 2, or maybe those reissue flip phones. This practice, sometimes termed abstinence, suggests that being perpetually connected is, well, maybe it's no longer cool. In fact, being always on now often signals that you're merely a cog in the machine.
I absolutely see this trend playing out. I mean, it's hard to miss. But I suppose I come at it from a slightly different perspective. It's an easy visual shorthand for rebellion, perhaps?
Precisely. And that brings us to the central question we need to address. Is the purposeful adoption of these stripped-down devices primarily a necessary, evidence-based psychological strategy to reclaim mental well-being and focus? Or is it perhaps better understood as a form of social status signaling, a conspicuous, maybe even performative de-optimizing luxury? I'll be arguing that this trend is driven by a profound, urgent psychological need, really a necessary cultural shift, which has in turn created a new form of elite status where the ability to be unreachable is, well, the ultimate luxury.
Okay, I get the psychological drive, I really do. But let's be practical for a second. While I fully acknowledge the desire to reduce digital distraction is incredibly valid, I challenge the necessity and efficacy of this extreme measure. I maintain that the wholesale abandonment of the smart device for something like a $299 light phone, it's often an aesthetic overcorrection, maybe more of a superficial signal of superiority than a genuine solution to a problem that could be managed with far less restrictive and often free behavioral practices already available on the phones we carry right now.
Let's ground this in necessity, though, because the data suggests the problem is dire enough to warrant maybe a radical solution. The trend toward digital detox, as you call it, is driven by a genuine, evidence-backed psychological need, one that requires a pretty radical break from the constant, engineered demands of the modern smartphone. We're talking about quantifiable harm here.
I agree the harm is quantifiable, sure, but tell me which findings you find most compelling, specifically in supporting a hardware change, not just, better habits.
Well, I'd point directly to the research coming out of Sapien Labs. They track mental well-being across different demographics, and their findings on 18 to 24-year-olds are startling. Mental well-being consistently improves with older age of first smartphone ownership. To be specific, if you look at young females, for those who received their first smartphone at age 6, a staggering 74% were experiencing mental health challenges and distress. Now that number drops significantly, down to 46% for those who waited until age 18. This isn't just like a poor habit. This is erosion of foundational psychological structures.
Okay, that is an alarming finding. And I fully agree that early adoption correlates negatively and profoundly with mental well-being. That correlation is tough to ignore, particularly with the 18 to 24-year-old female demographic you cited.
Exactly. And this damage, I argue, is rooted in the architecture of attention itself. As institutions like the Center for Humane Technology have repeatedly noted, the financial incentives driving technology development are often directly misaligned with human flourishing. The constant intrusive stream of notifications drives frequent task switching. Every time you shift focus from, say, a complex report to check a WhatsApp message, your brain incurs a documented switching cost.
Can you elaborate on that for a moment? When you say switching costs, are we talking about true mental fatigue, or is it just a few seconds lost here and there?
It's real processing power lost. Switching cost is the measurable decrease in efficiency, an increase in error rate that happens when the brain is forced to rapidly context shift between tasks. It undermines the crucial ability to engage in sustained focus, what Cal Newport famously terms deep work, the high-quality output required for creative problem solving. Being always on now basically signals that you are constantly distracted, always available for interruption, and therefore maybe a low-level cog in this perpetually distracted machine.
I find the idea that unreachability is the new status symbol, the luxury that signals control over your attention and time, highly compelling as a cultural observation. I really do. But let's circle back to my core challenge, the necessity of the hardware solution. My argument remains that this wholesale abandonment ignores the essential, functional role the smartphone plays in modern life. The LifePhone 2, for instance, it's a $299 tool that replaces functions we could manage with a $0 behavioral change.
But those behavioral changes require, well, almost Herculean effort against an environment intentionally designed to thwart your self-discipline. We are trying to fight a billion-dollar industry with willpower alone. It's not a fair fight.
I don't think it requires a Herculean effort. I think it requires intentionality. I mean, the digital minimalism community is full of effective, low-friction strategies. If the goal is reducing distraction and boosting attention spans, you can achieve that simply by deleting the most addictive social media apps. Or, using the built-in limits like Apple Screen Time or Android's digital well-being to time-lock your apps. Or, and this is quite effective, applying the visual technique, switching your display to black and white, grayscale. As practitioners note, this immediately makes the screen less visually appealing, drastically reduces the dopamine kick you get from vibrant colors, all without abandoning necessary utilities.
I see why you push for personal discipline and behavioral conditioning. I do. But let me give you a different perspective, one rooted more in the addiction model. Personal discipline often fails precisely because the technology is intentionally designed to be addictive. We know from neuroscience that social media usage activates dopamine-driven reward mechanisms. And critically, these rewards are reinforced via variable reinforcement.
Wait, when you say variable reinforcement, are you essentially talking about the slot machine effect, that kind of unpredictable reward?
Exactly that. It's not about checking your calendar every day at 9 a.m. and getting a predictable reward. It's the unpredictable rush of receiving likes, comments, or notifications. That random reward pattern that keeps you compulsively pulling the lever, so to speak. For individuals struggling with this biologically exploiting feedback loop, simply uninstalling apps often isn't enough because, well, they can be instantly reinstalled the minute willpower flags.
But I must push back a bit on the rehab metaphor here. I respect the comparison to an addiction model, but equating scrolling TikTok or needing GPS with, say, substance abuse, it seems a little extreme, doesn't it? Are we talking about true dependency and physical craving, or simply poor habit formation, which is arguably manageable through consistent cognitive restructuring? The idea that you need to purchase a brand new device, it's starting to look like performative consumerism disguised as digital liberation.
I would frame it differently. For those caught in the habitual checking cycle, a physical boundary might be the only true way to break the pattern successfully. The LifePhone 2's core functionality, it's its non-functionality. It simply, as they say, does not allow for app downloads, social media, internet browsing, email access, or even news alerts. This hardware constraint acts as a necessary physical firewall against a powerful neurologically exploitative design. It removes the temptation entirely. For many, that initial radical break, that sort of technological asceticism, is necessary to reset the reward mechanism before they can maybe responsibly handle the complexity of a smartphone again.
Okay, I understand the reset function argument, but I still argue that the hardware constraint is unnecessarily restrictive for the vast majority of adults. The philosophy of digital minimalism encourages intentional use, which does not inherently require purchasing a new, limited device that costs, again, $299 plus a monthly plan. That cost inherently makes this an elite luxury, a status statement, rather than an accessible solution for the public health crisis you described earlier. And this brings us to the immense practical cost of this anti-optimization, which you briefly glossed over earlier. The smartphone is no longer just a toy. It is fundamentally integrated into citizenship, employment, personal safety. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy the necessity of this trend when you consider the functional requirements of modern life.
Okay, give me an example of the friction you find unreasonable. Where does it really break down for you?
Well, look at mobile authenticator functions. Multi-factor authentication, right? We need apps for work, school, government services now. We rely on them for bank authentication, mobile ticket purchases, NFC payments.
and critically reliable GPS navigation. Trading all that all-in-one convenience for the dumb phone aesthetic forces users into, frankly, unreasonable friction. Or worse, the inelegant and honestly anti-minimalist solution of carrying a secondary device. You see people carrying an old deactivated smartphone in their bag, only used for 2FA, or a separate GPS unit for driving. I mean, that completely defeats the entire spirit of the intended liberation of minimalism, doesn't it?
That's a strong, practical argument regarding convenience, absolutely. But I think it fundamentally misunderstands the severity of the problem we are attempting to address. If we are forced to choose, we must prioritize psychological development and social capability over, say, GPS convenience or seamless banking. We have to address the potential trauma the smartphone is inflicting, especially on younger generations.
How severe is the trauma compared to the inconvenience, though? Can we quantify that trade-off?
Well, look again at the Sapien Labs data. Of the 6 dimensions of mental function they measured, the social self-dimension, that's our ability to relate to others, self-confidence, self-image, that improved most significantly and steeply with older age of first smartphone ownership. This suggests a profound social deficit is being created in youth. The report implies that early smartphone ownership displaces literally thousands of hours of face-to-face social interaction during crucial developmental windows. We're potentially talking 1,000 to 2,000 hours annually, which is essential for learning complex social cues like tone of voice, body language, conflict resolution, basic human interaction skills.
Wow, that scale of social displacement is truly concerning, I grant you. Suggesting an entire generation might be losing those vital inputs, yeah.
So if the smartphone is eroding social capacity, if it's linked to increasing suicidal thoughts, and contributing to feelings of aggression towards others, then the trade-off in inconvenience for your banking app seems entirely justified to prioritize psychological health. The consequences are simply too dire to prioritize seamless transactions. When we frame it this way, the dumb phone isn't a luxury. It's perhaps closer to a necessary piece of life-saving medical equipment, conceptually speaking. But doesn't that inconvenience actually become the point? Doesn't that bring us back to this idea of social status? The wealthy, the tech insiders, the culturally literate youth, they are consciously choosing not to engage with the system of constant availability. They're rejecting that anti-hustle culture. By defining their freedom from being constantly on as a luxury, they validate the entire trend.
So the status is rooted in demonstrating you can afford to fail at optimization, that you're above it all?
Exactly. The ability to incur friction, to consciously step away from optimizing every second of your life for the sake of attention and tranquility, it becomes a rational, almost anti-consumerist statement against technology designed solely to steal your time. Mental health becomes a form of cultural currency, and the ability to be unreachable is the ultimate signal of autonomy. Your $1,500 smartphone suddenly becomes, well, a bit cringe because it signals you are beholden to someone or something else, always interruptible.
That's a compelling cultural analysis, definitely. But have you considered the historical precedent of anti-optimization as a status marker? This focus on unreachability as luxury risks reducing a critical mental health discussion to just another fleeting, fashionable trend. I mean, think about the historical hipster phenomenon, right? They adopted low-tech symbols, typewriters, vinyl records, fixed-wheel bikes, specifically to signal cultural capital and exclusivity.
But those items didn't address a critical mental health crisis in the same way. This feels different, more urgent.
It may be different in its origin, I'll give you that, but the outcome might be the same. If the primary motivation for buying the light phone is signaling social positioning, what we might call conspicuous de-optimization, then the substantive health benefits may become secondary. It becomes less about achieving true digital liberation through personal change and more about buying a new status symbol to join an elite club that can afford to be inaccessible. The consumerism, ironically, undermines the purported minimalism.
I believe the motivation is likely dual, yes. But in this case, the status component actually validates the deeper psychological need. The widespread adoption of dumb phones, even if it's limited to a specific demographic right now, signals a vital cultural recognition of the profound psychological harm potentially caused by omnipresent smart devices. This choice to incur inconvenience, to step away from the optimization race, is, I think, a necessary and ultimately rational response to reclaiming agency and attention in the digital age.
While the intention is vital and the awareness of the problem is absolutely important, I stand by my assertion that the dumb phone approach is a highly specialized and, yes, potentially performative solution. We know many of the benefits, reduced anxiety, increased focus, can be gained through behavioral practices that cost nothing, like utilizing grayscale mode and setting dedicated screen time limits. To me, the most sustainable path to well-being lies in intellectual discipline and mindful curation, using the tools we have intentionally, rather than relying on a hardware downgrade that creates, let's face it, frustrating friction in necessary aspects of modern life.
Agreed. Regardless of the means, though, this whole debate underscores a growing societal realization that perhaps the most pressing challenge we face is how to reclaim our time and attention from technology, designed specifically to capture it. It forces a necessary conversation about the true cost of constant connectivity.
Indeed, and it certainly shows that individuals are desperate to find a solution, whether that's through radical hardware changes, effectively buying their way out of distraction, or through quiet, persistent behavioral shifts aimed at regaining control. The conversation is definitely happening.